Welcome to another podcast of You Can't Handle the Truth. And we are here again to have what I think is a very interesting topic. What can you tell the viewers what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, so Mary Jane, weed, medical marijuana.
Yeah.
Marijuana.
Yep.
And
It's out there, right?
and the use of marijuana as for medicinal purposes, if you have injuries or disabilities, and ultimately what can happen if you get drug tested, have a medical marijuana card. Now you do a bunch of employment law and you've seen that there is an issue here. Right. Talk about like having a medical marijuana card and having a job and what happens if you test positive.
Right. And we're specifically talking about the state of Florida for our purposes right now, even though a lot of these cases end up being federal type cases. I've been doing employment law for 21 plus years. Okay. Admittedly, most of the cases that come through my door, I don't take. I would say it's upwards of 95 to 97%. And why? The business is about proof, not truth. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, to the outsider, well, it's easy to prove it. Well, it's not. And the medical marijuana cases are going to be a series of trials and errors of trying to see why and how an employee can be protected if they've been, given or have, the medical marijuana card and they get fired. Because really that's what you need. You need some adverse employment action, a firing or demotion because of it. The problem is, and I don't know if it's a problem, but the law is basically that, you're not protected, okay, because you have a medical marijuana card. You're not in a protected class. What's protected? Age, disability, gender, race, national origin, religion. Those are protected classes, but it's taken years and years of legislation and history throughout our jurisprudence to get to those levels, to get to that status. And we're not going to go into that today. But right now, if you called me today and you said, well, I have a medical marijuana card and I was fired, let's make it as simple as possible, okay? Did they fire you because you have a medical marijuana card? Yes, sir. You don't have a case. Did they fire you because you have a disability that, ended up being a situation where you had to get a medical marijuana card? Maybe you have a case there, okay? So, we had someone come in, recently where, and I've gone through a lot of these, and you get a lot of calls where you can tell, well, it's somebody, you're smoking pot and you got fired because you were late for work. But that's not a case, ladies and gentlemen, okay? You got to show up for work, okay? Or maybe you don't, but if you get fired, that's what happens, right? This gentleman, I believe, and you film because you always know the facts. Like the facts to me, I always was skewing the facts a little bit because maybe it's just because I want to think they're different.
Yeah, right. You want to fit them to your scenario.
Exactly.
Well, what I love about this, and I love you talking about this because I've never heard another attorney want to kind of concentrate on, if you can, potentially on these cases, because ultimately because there's no protection. Right. We've got to create protection through case law. And you have to do that with a case. So whenever we get these cases that come into the firm, am I expecting them, hey, can this potentially be something that becomes a seminal case to allow this to be a protection for everybody who takes medicinal, medication in the form of marijuana in this situation? So
no, yeah, and so we weed out a lot of these, no pun intended, right? So they come in and they I think this one was found us on the website. And he's got this, first I look for, credibility, because this business is so much about credibility, whether you believe that or not. The more credible clients get the awards. So he wrote a book and, and he took his time and he worked for the school system for 20 years. And I think he was applying for a new job, right?
Yeah, he was applying to another high school.
Right. And so he was a school teacher. And now, we don't need to get into the ins and outs of what kind of school teacher he was, but by all accounts, based on what he said, no performance issues. By all accounts, he's a good teacher. No disciplinary problems. And apparently, throughout his life, this is very important, okay? He had suffered from herniated discs. He's had multiple surgeries, I believe. He's had pain that is not going away. It has not been cured by surgical intervention. It has not been cured by opioids, right? Medication. So, and this is key here because he says that at some point in time, not too long ago, he gets, he goes to a physician who tells him, you've tried all of these options, and that's very, very clear here. You tried all these options and they're not working for you. So I'm going to prescribe you a medical marijuana card and try this out. And he now affirms that when he tried it out, it's alleviated his pain. He says that he takes it. I'm not sure what form he takes, but he takes them at 10 o'clock at night. He wakes up the next morning, never takes it on during the job, and goes to work, does his job. He does it to the best of his abilities. He can perform all of the essential functions of his job. But at some point, his employer, I guess the new employer, he's applying for a new job, right?
Yeah, it goes to the application process. And at the end of the application process, usually if you're working for the state, they're going to drug test you.
Right.
So they take the drug test, and he, clearly pops positive for opioids and marijuana. Now, when that happens, what they do, if you pop positive for any type of opioid,
right,
is they ask you, do you have a prescription? They verify your prescription. They validate your prescription. They take it from a positive test to a negative test if you have a legitimate prescription for popping positive for that opioid.
Right.
But they didn't do that for the medical marijuana.
Right. And then you can't say, well, they discriminated against medical marijuana users versus opioid, because you know what? You could say whatever you want, but it's not going to be protected. So you can go fly up and you jump up a tree, right? But disability is protected. So these cases right now are in the guinea pig stage, and I think that what you're looking at is a situation where how is it where the usage of the medical marijuana that is made available to you because or by virtue of your disability, and are they now terminating you or causing you not to get a job because of the disability? And if it's because of just the medical marijuana, you're not going to go anywhere. But if it's because of the disability, you may have a claim under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or in this case, in Florida statutes, 760, Chapter 760. And I don't know, I had a case many years ago that I told you about that was very similar, but it was with opioids. It was a substitute teacher. She drove around was called upon for her job to drive around to different schools. And she was on some type of medication. It's been so many years, I don't know what it was, but it was some medication that was not conducive for her to drive. So she had this husband of hers that was so nice, took out his own insurance policy and drove this woman around to work. And it was fine for years and years and years. And I'm getting to a point here with employers, because the employer knew about it. They knew about this condition. Well, lo and behold, we get this new young buck that came in as the manager, and she ends up, I'm not having to deal with this. You're going to drive. Your husband's a liability. He should not be driving. But we've been doing this for years. It doesn't matter. You need to drive to work, or we're going to fire you.
So for our viewers out there, if they receive medical marijuana, if they have a legitimate card, they have a legitimate reason for having that medical marijuana card, a legitimate disability and a reason for that card, and they potentially, they have a job where they could potentially get drug tested, or they're going to, try and get a new job where they could potentially get drug tested, pop positive for marijuana in their system. What can they do to protect themselves, protect their job, and or bolster a potential claim for, going against an employer who fires them who's discriminating against their disability?
With, the caveat that we don't know how these cases are going to be handled, but we do know how an ADA case can be handled. And,
And what's that ADA case? Clarify for...
We know how it can be handled in the sense that it may be counterintuitive, but you need to let your employer know. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to let my employer know my business. Well, you don't have to do that. But one of the keys is notice. Notice to the employer. You were regarded as disabled, or the employer knew or should have known that you were disabled. What is a disability? Well, in our example earlier, the herniated disc, it has to be a qualified disability under the ADA. But if you have a disability, you've been prescribed medical marijuana, going back to your example, and you're employed and you work there, you might want to bring it up. Well, I might lose my job, and that's where it becomes hairy. But if they don't know about it, then you don't have a claim under the ADA.
So let's say you're going through the initial application process.
Before you're even hired.
And you put, there's always an option to, sometimes depending on what your job is, usually if it's a job where you potentially have to do physical things, they're going to ask you about disabilities. Are they going to protect themselves by putting that disability down in that application because you're accepted
The disability, yeah.
Yeah, because ultimately,
Yeah.
you know, I haven't really had to apply for many jobs. I've become, you know, very lucky with connections, really.
Yeah.
So I'm not having to fill out applications to get a job. But my understanding of how they work and having reviewed them
Sometimes they'll ask you.
is,
Have it.
well, when you submit your application, they review it. You usually have the job, you're accepted before you have a drug test.
Yeah, well, you're talking about, well, so the disability part, I mean, if you have something that first of all, they should know that they should be able to provide reasonable accommodation if you have a disability. So if they're asking you if, and I don't know if they ask this on applications these days, but if they ask you if you have a disability, I think you should say yes.
You see.
Because you do. But that has again, that's separate from whether you're using a medical marijuana card or if you're taking opioids or if you're doing physical therapy. You have the bottom line is, does the employer know whether you have a disability? And if they know you have a disability, and then down the road the doctor says, well, you know, you've tried all your options. We're gonna try out medical marijuana. At that point, you have a situation where the employer knew about it. I know this is a little different from what you're saying, but they knew about it. And then down the road, you had this medical marijuana claim. Well, you advised your employer many years ago that, you know, or 2 months ago, that you had this disability. And whatever you get treated for is what you get treated for. So then you can say, well, you're fired now because you have a medical marijuana card. Well, but now you're firing me because you knew about my disability, and I think you're firing me because of my disability. Are you going to win that? I don't know. It's a matter of facts and proof. But the point is you have to put them on notice. Now, in your situation, the drug test is different because they're allowed to conduct reasonable drug tests.
Right.
So, but going back to the same thing, if the employer doesn't know about the disability and then you submit to a random drug test, you could be in trouble. Now, I realize in the application process, that becomes a difficult thing. Mm-hmm. You know, are we going to have more employers that are going to be accepting of people that are smoking marijuana? Or, you know, I don't know. I think there's a lot of opinions out there.
Well, my issue with it, and I know there's no...
Is that making sense? Or, you know,
yeah. Well, my issue with it, and I know there's no variance, but I think it holds a lot of weight, is that they're looking at an opioid prescription, mm-hmm. reversing the positive drug test and negative for the opioid, but they're not doing the medical marijuana.
Yes.
And
that's probably right.
And I think that helps like distinguish some things. It's like, you know, should we be looking at, you know, should there be some sort of federal rule or law that comes out that says you have to treat, if someone has a medical marijuana card, you have to treat it like your policy with opioid use?
I think that's where we ultimately headed. But you know how things go. I mean,
take years and years.
How many years ago has it been since, homosexuality wasn't protected?
Right.
You know, until a few years ago.
Right.
You know, I would get those cases sometimes called gender discrimination. You know, but again, they're hard cases, and you never ever want to rely on a lawsuit for your point. Obviously, this guy, in our example from earlier, he's been, you know, a teacher for years. This is his profession.
Right.
It's not somebody that's trying to get a job for the first time.
Right.
So anyway, it's very complicated.
It's very complicated, but it's really interesting, and I think it's going to affect more and more people. So
yes.
if you know, you have any questions or anything, we're always here for guidance and advice as much as we can. And if you like, please like, subscribe, and follow. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.